Selected Short Stories. A Modern Don Juan by Major R.L. Taylor. The following story is taken from the collection Private Snooks and Smith at War. Private William Bill Smith is a Londoner, while Private Alfred, Alf Snooks, is from Liverpool. In this story we have Private Smith representing the South, London in this case, and Private Snooks and three other North countrymen representing the North. The canteen of an army training establishment during the early part of 1942. Snooks to three friends, all of whom are North countrymen.
What's he got that we haven't got? That's what I would like to know. There must be some explanation. Now we've been up here in the North for nearly 3 months. We are, so to speak, on our own doorstep. Then along comes this Londoner Smith, and what happens? Like all good troops, since we arrived here, we've done our best to brighten life for the civvies, especially civvies in skirt, with nice faces. And between the ages of 18 and 25, everything runs very smoothly until they set eyes on Private Smith of London. After that, however, they've only got time for us when this chap from the South can't take 'em out. Well, I think you've almost given the explanation in your last few words, Elf. Now Bill Smith comes from the South and doesn't he let you know it? You would think sometimes that London was Great Britain when you hear him talking of his native town. Now fair's fair. Bill Smith is not a bad-looking chap, and he does know how to talk, and sometimes he's even funny. These girls up here never been to London. It's so far away that many of them are never likely to go. As a result of the German Blitz in 1940, many people have got the idea that the Londoners are the most wonderful people in Great Britain. Well, they are wonderful. You can't imagine anybody being braver. I'll take off my hat to them any time. But now comes the point. They weren't any more wonderful than the people of Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, and dozens of other towns in the north. What's in the distance always seems better than what's near. Now, in peacetime, when a chap wants to climb some mountains, he nearly always goes off to Switzerland or Austria, perhaps. At any rate, off he goes to some place on the continent, forgetting that Wales and Scotland are almost nothing else but mountains. Now, these girls up here are something like that. They've got plenty of good things on the doorstep, looking round at the party. Us, for instance, but all their thoughts are on something much farther away. Bates, thoughtfully. I think, Willie, that you've got something there. It's very much the same with the Canadian troops, or with the Poles, the French, the Dutch, the Norwegians, the Belgians. Many of the girls, if it comes to a question of choosing as to whether they will go out with a British Tommy or one of these foreigners, nearly always choose a foreigner. Now, in a way, you could compare these chaps from the South with the foreign troops. They are as good as foreigners anyway in our part of the country. Madam, that's all true enough in one way. You can't blame the girls for wanting a bit of a change. They like going out with these Southerners and foreigners, having a good time with them. But you find when it comes to the more serious things, such as getting married, for instance, that most of them never dream of taking anybody else but a good steady chap from the North. Snooks, perhaps you're right, Waddy, but the serious things have to wait until after the war as far as I'm concerned. I believe in taking troubles as they come, not in anticipating them. I want to have a good time now, no doubt. What you've been saying is the explanation, but it's a poor comfort. I think, myself, we ought to teach Private Don Juan Bill Smith a lesson. I think we're all agreed on that point. We must teach him a lesson, but I can't see at the moment how we're going to do it. The sergeant major, who entered the canteen a minute or two before, and has now procured himself a glass of beer, walks across to the table where the 4 North countrymen are seated. Sergeant Major, with astonishment shown both in his face and in his voice. What's the matter with you boys this evening? You've all got full glasses of beer in front of you. I've never seen that happen before. Is there anything wrong with you or with the beer? Snooks, well, Sergeant Major, we were talking over a little private problem. I don't want to poke my nose into your private affairs, boys, but is it anything where I could help you out? Snooks to his three friends. Shall we consult the sergeant major, boys? More than once in the past has been able to give good advice. It's all part of a sergeant major's job to be able to give good advice, speaking from his past experience, as it were. The sergeant major has been a soldier for about 15 years, so he should be able to advise us what to do. All agree with Snooks. Well, sergeant major, it's like this. Tonight, Private Smith is out with my girl. She'll only go out with me when Private Smith is otherwise engaged. By otherwise engaged, I mean when he's taken out Waddy's girl, or Willie's girl, or Bates' girl. We're all feeling pretty browned off about it, Sergeant Major. To these girls up here, he seems to be a kind of a Don Juan and London Blitz hero combined. Before you come across, we just agreed that he ought to be taught a lesson. Well, boys, it's not the first time that this kind of thing's happened in the army. Certainly won't be the last. It's happening off and on, most of the time. Now, if you can find a way of teaching him a lesson and getting a good laugh out of it, at the same time, I'll be prepared to give you any assistance. But I'm afraid, however, that you'll have to wait a bit. In fact, Snooks, Smith is out with your girl for the last time this evening. Orders have just come through that within 48 hours we are to proceed someplace in the Western Highlands for a month's special training. Snooks, I was talking to a chap the other day who just come back from special training in the Highlands. I can understand from what he said that we've got something to look forward to. Sergeant Major, his interest aroused. What did he tell you? Well, Sergeant Major, half of the time they seem to spend in climbing up mountains and then climbing down again. This chap said he didn't know which was worst. Then they spent a lot of time in landing on a rocky coast with full back from small boats. This fellow said that he wasn't dry the whole time he was there. Then they used to send him out on something they call endurance tests. They give you enough food for one square meal to take with you, and then on a nice rainy day, they always choose the rainy days for it, they take you up to some place in the mountains, and there you have to live for 3 days. And then, if they don't kill you in this way, it seems that there are plenty of other ways they try to do it. This chap said that what he needed most at the moment was 2 or 3 months in a rest home. SM, sounds pretty bad, but you know what it means, boys. That now you get your opportunity of having a bit of fun with Smith. Snooks, that's all very well, Sergeant Major, but what are we going to do up there? Well, as you were saying just now, I've been in the army for 15 years, and if I may say so, I have learned a thing or two about how the War Office works. Now, if they send you out where you have to practice landing on a rocky coast from small boats, it can only mean one thing. What's that, Sergeant Major? It means that when we invade the continent, you'll be landed from big boats on a nice flat sandy beach. This climbing of mountains means the same thing. It means that we are going to invade a flat country. It was just the same thing in 1940. The fellows who were issued with tropical kit knew, or should have known, that they were being sent to Norway. If, when we go off, we are issued with Arctic kit, then we'll know for certainty that we're being sent to the Mediterranean or to the Far East. From my experience, that's the way the War Office works. Well, I'll have to be going now, boys. Don't forget that I'm prepared to give you a hand in having a bit of fun with Smith. 3 weeks later, the same 4 North countrymen are seated together in the canteen of the training establishment in the Highlands. Bates, well, Alf, we've only got another week to go up here. If we are going to have a bit of fun with Bill Smith, we'll have to do it soon. Snooks, agreed, Bates, and this afternoon, while we were up to our necks in that river, an idea came to me. Just one of those sudden ideas. As you've all discovered to your cost, girls are very scarce up here. They are just like a drop of water in the Sahara Desert. As far as I know, I'm the only one of us who's been lucky enough to find a nice girl. Even that's been hard work, for her place is over 2 hours' walk across the mountains. Every time I see her, it means between 4 and 5 hours' walk in the mountains. Still, she's worth it. She's a nice little bit. Now, I expect you've all noticed that Don Juan's not been feeling particularly happy up here. He admitted to me himself that he misses the good times he had in the north of England, taking our girls out, although he didn't say that. Now, in 2 days' time, I'm going to see my girl again. I can tell Don Juan that I'm very sorry to see that he is so lonely up here in the Highlands, and then say that my girl has a quite nice sister, and that if he comes along with me next time I go, I'm sure he'll be delighted to see him. Will's breaking in. I don't see how that's going to teach him a lesson. If your girl hasn't got a sister, then the same thing may happen as before, and before you know where you are, you find that Don Juan's taken her off into the mountains for a walk, and where will you be? Snooks, not quite so foolish as all that, Willie. Just hear me out. I'm not taking any risks, don't you worry. Now, the evening Don Juan and I are going off together. After the evening meal I tell him that I'm not feeling very well as a result of spending much of my time in rivers, and that I'm going to turn in early, and the hope of a good night's sleep putting me right, of course. Don Juan will be disappointed, but like a good pal, I tell him how to get to the place. It's not easy to find your way there, but if I give him minute instructions as to how to get there, he could do it all right. Now, boys, we come to the best part of my plan. Up here, it's exactly the same as all over the rest of the country. All signposts have been taken down. In the directions I give to Don Juan, I tell him about 3 signposts that will help him to find his way, saying, of course, that it's been very careless of the local people to have left them standing. Now, we've got 2 days in which to make those signposts and arrange to have them put up at the wrong places. 1 or 2 of us may need a half-day off, but I'm sure that the Sergeant Major would be willing to play. He did promise to give us a hand, and I think the idea will appeal to his sense of humor. The following morning, Private Snooks goes to see the Sergeant Major. Sergeant Major? Well, what is it, Snooks? You remember our conversation in the north of England, Sergeant Major, about having a bit of fun with Smith? I remember quite well, but I thought you must have forgotten all about it. I don't see how you're going to do it in this God-forsaken hole. We have a plan, Sergeant Major, but we'll need your help. Let me hear it. Anything to make life a bit brighter up here. Well, it's like this, Sergeant Major. There aren't many girls in these parts, and I'm one of the lucky few who found a really nice girl. You didn't tell me, Snooks. I know they are scarce. I've kept my eyes open without any luck. About all I've seen are mountain goats. I noticed, however, that you were very often missing from the canteen in the evening. I guess that you must have found someone. But what's the plan? Smith also been one of the unlucky ones. That's why he walks about like a man who has lost a tenner and found a tanner. Tonight, I'm going to tell him that my girl has a very pretty, attractive sister, and then offer to take him with me when I go to see her tomorrow evening. When tomorrow evening comes, I go sick, and I tell him how to get to the girl's place, which is over 2 hours' walk across the mountains. The boys and myself are going to make some signposts this evening, which we want to put up tomorrow in the wrong places. Then, with any luck, Smith not only never get to the girl's place, but will also get completely lost in the mountains. Well, we want your help, Sergeant Major, is to see that 2 or 3 of us get a few hours off tomorrow, so that we can go and plant the signposts. Sergeant Major roaring with laughter. A wonderful idea, Snooks. An absolute gem. Don't know how you ever thought of it. I'll have to be careful in future that I don't start taking you girls out. I'll arrange that 2 or 3 of you have half a day off. What are their names? Snooks, there is Wills and Bates and myself, Sergeant Major. Good. I'll see the company commander and tell him that I've got a special job for you to do for me tomorrow. The same evening, Smith and Snooks are having a drink in the canteen. Smith, I'm jolly glad that we have only got another 5 days in this hole. Well, Bill, We don't know yet where we've been sent to. The next place may be still worse. Shut up, Alf! There couldn't be a worse place in the British Isles. I don't believe it. As you are feeling so badly about it, Bill, I was wondering if you'd like to come along with me tomorrow evening. My girl has a sister, a really good-looking one, and a jolly good sport, I'd say. What about coming along with me tomorrow evening? You certainly don't deserve it after all. The tricks you played us in the north of England with our girls. Well, that story's forgotten now. Smith. Well, Alf, I can understand in one way that you feel a bit sore about it, but I can't do much about it if the girls prefer to go out with me. It's very decent of you, Alf, to offer to take me along tomorrow evening. Of course, I'll come. It's a pity you didn't think of it before. What it really means is that I've wasted 3 valuable weeks. Still, better late than never. The signposts are made and placed in carefully chosen spots. Snooks and Smith, having finished work for the day, are on their way to the mess for supper. I'm not feeling very much like eating, Bill. I think this constant wet weather's got into my bones. I find it quite hard work to drag my feet along. A nice mug of tea will soon put you right, Alf. You mustn't go sick this evening, of all evenings. I tell you what we'll do, Alf. I've got a bottle of really good Scotch in my room. I managed to pick it up. It's been the only bright spot in our stay here. When we go in to supper, we'll pour a double into your mug of tea. Hot tea and whiskey is a good mixture when you're feeling under the weather. It's helped to put many a man on his feet again. Smith fetches the whiskey from his room, and when they are seated at supper, pours a liberal portion into Snook's tea. Smith. How do you feel now, Alf? It's warmed my inside up a bit, but I've still got that tired feeling in the legs. The whisky'll soon work its way down to the legs. By the time we've finished supper, you'll be feeling quite well enough to start on that 2 hours walk. I hope so for my own sake, and for your sake too, Bill. I shouldn't like to have to give up at the last moment. Smith, I see there is still another double left in the bottle. I think we should be on the safe side, Alf, so when you get your next mug of tea, you'd better finish off the bottle. Snooks nodded very hopefully. We can try at any rate, Bill, but I've got the feeling that this cold or influenza, or whatever it is, has come to stay for a few days. I had exactly the same feeling once before when we were training in the north of England, and I finished up with a week in bed. You chaps from the north are always so pessimistic. I'd say that 2 liberal double whiskies should be enough to put any man on his feet again. That's our experience down south anyway. At the end of the meal, well, how are you feeling now, Alf? As soon as we start walking, you'll find that the whisky'll work down into your legs. In half an hour, you'll be feeling as fit as a fiddle. Snooks, I'm terribly sorry to disappoint you, Bill, but I'm certain I shan't be able to make it this evening, and I don't think you'd ever find your own way there. You chaps from the south, especially from big towns like London, aren't very good at finding your way about in the mountains. It's not to be expected. I'm sorry to upset our plans, but we'll have to give it up, Bill. Perhaps what you say is right about some people in the south, Alf. For myself, if I want very badly to get to a place, I've always found up till now that I've got there all right, especially if there is a nice girl at the other end. You might easily get lost in the mountains, Bill. That wouldn't be so pleasant. I'd be prepared to risk that. If you really can't come, Alf, you can tell me how to get there. I'm beginning to think you must be really ill, if you give up the chance of seeing a nice girl. I'll tell you the way, Bill, and I've just remembered that the first time I went, I saw 3 signposts on the way. I'd almost forgotten all about them. I only used them the first time. With the help of these signposts, I think you'd be able to find it all right, even though you're a Londoner. Now, Bill, when you leave the building, you must turn to the right and follow the footpath for about half an hour. Then you'll come to a place where 2 or 3 paths meet. Here you'll find the first signpost. I can never remember how the name of the place is spelled. It's full of G's, Y's, and L's, but that doesn't matter very much, for there is only one signpost and only one name on it. I can't understand why these signposts were not taken down in 1940. Either they thought there was no danger of the Germans ever coming here, or they just forgot. Well, at the first signpost, you go off to the left and follow the path for about half an hour. Then you will get to another place where two or three paths meet. But if you just follow the signpost, you can't go wrong. You'll have to keep on for about 3/4 of an hour until you get to the last signpost. It points across a brook. Jump that and follow your nose till you reach a river running right down to the sea. The only house near the beach in this place is the one you want. Sounds very simple to me, Alf. If there are only 3 signposts and they have only got one name on them, how can I possibly go wrong? Well, Alf, if you don't mind, I think I'll be getting along. 3 hours later finds Smith down by the sea, but there is no house to be seen anywhere. He decides to make his way along the coast in the hope of finding the house. He does not know whether to go north or south, but decides to go north as the mountains seem somewhat less difficult there. It's very hard work, not without danger, for in many places the mountain slope ends suddenly with a drop of hundreds of feet into the water. After climbing up and down for more than an hour, he decides to give up his search as hopeless and to return to the footpath leading down to the sea. Night, however, has overtaken him, and after a long and unsuccessful search, he realizes that he will never be able to find the footpath in the dark. Common sense tells him that the only thing to do is to wait for the first sign of daylight. To add to his discomfort, it is raining, and he does his best to find a spot where he can wait out of the rain. He finds a rock not very far from the water's edge that gives him a certain amount of cover. It seems to him that time passes all too slowly, although it is helped somewhat by the smoking of one cigarette after another. He is just about to light his last cigarette. When he sees a light out at sea, it shows up very clearly in the blackness of the night. The light is blinking and understanding suddenly comes to him. A signal is being sent. Smith recognizes the letters BF, which are flashed again and again. He smiles sorrowfully as he says to himself, "Yes, I am a bloody fool, all right." Then the light stops blinking, and while Smith is still wondering what it may mean, he hears the sound of oars. The darkness is so grey that although he looks hard in the direction of the sound, there is at first nothing to be seen but the blackness of the water. The sounds, however, get closer and closer, and at last he is able to see a small boat a few yards from the water's edge. He hears the boat run onto the sand of the beach, and almost at the same time sees a figure rise slightly and then land on the beach. Smith cannot suppress his excitement. All the stories he has ever read of German agents landing on the coast of northwest Scotland return to him. Perhaps this is the real thing. Perhaps, after all, the Germans do this kind of thing. In the past he has always laughed at these stories. They were good stories, nothing more. But what does this mean anyway? He must watch very carefully and keep his head clear. The boat is rowed out to sea again and almost immediately disappears from view. The man who has been landed commences to walk up and down the beach. At one place he passes quite close to the rock behind which Smith is taking cover from the rain. As he walks past the first time, Smith sees that the man, who is well built, is in uniform, although the uniform looks somewhat strange. He decides to take a closer look when the man passes the rock on the return trip. When the man approaches the rock again, Smith waits until he is just opposite him, and then a second later, when the man is not much more than a yard away, puts his head round the corner to get as good a view as possible. This time Smith is left in no doubt. The man is wearing the cap of a German naval officer. Those stories must be true after all. This German officer has been rowed into the beach, but he must have a rendezvous with somebody. Smith is torn by two feelings. The first thing he wants to do after discovering that the man is a German is to jump upon him and make him prisoner, but common sense tells him not to act too hastily. For 5 minutes the German officer walks backwards and forwards along the beach, and then, when he is about 20 yards away, Smith sees that he has come to a stop. His eyes are now becoming more used to the darkness, and he is able to see another figure beside that of the German. For a few minutes the two figures talk together in hushed voices, and although Smith does his best to pick up bits of their conversation, he is too far away to hear what they are saying. The only thing he knows for a certainty is that the conversation is in English. He would have given many months' pay to have been near enough to follow the conversation. Then, just as quickly as the other man has come, he disappears again. While the German officer continues to walk up and down the beach, Smith regrets that he cannot follow the German agent who has talked with the officer, but he has disappeared into the darkness, and it will be hopeless to try and find him. The German officer now takes a torch from his pocket, and Smith sees him flash it in the direction taken by the boat. Before long the boat will be back to take him off. In the meantime, Smith must do something, but what, he asks himself. The thought has come to him many times throughout the last 2 or 3 hours that the present circumstances are hardly favourable, that the commanding officer will be far from pleased when he gets back, and the thought of long periods of CB have passed through his mind. These thoughts are, however, quickly followed by another thought. If when he arrives back he has the German naval officer as his prisoner, then he feels certain the CEO will be prepared to forget everything else. He may be able to tell the story to the CEO in such a way that he will believe the delay in returning to the training establishment has been caused by this meeting with an enemy officer. No sooner has the idea begun to take shape in his mind than he decides to take action, for the boat may be back at any moment to fetch the officer. Smith has had practice enough in attacking enemy soldiers from behind, while taking part in training. This is the first time he has had a chance of trying out the method on a German. The next time the officer passes his rock, he jumps upon his back, and a second later the man is helpless on the beach. Smith is excited and in high spirits. This is much better than trying it out on his friends. He remembers what he has been taught. To make certain that the officer will not be able to say anything for the next hour or two, Smith gives him a hard blow at the back of the neck. The next thing is to move the officer to a safer spot a bit farther inland. The men in the boat that come to fetch the officer are certain to do their best to try and find him. With great difficulty Smith gets the man on his shoulder and then begins to make his way inland. When he thinks he has placed sufficient distance between himself and the beach, he lays the officer on the ground. In the distance he can hear the sound of the oars as the boat is rowed into the beach. How he would like to see their faces when they find no sign of the man they have come to pick up. Then for half an hour he can hear the sound of voices, and sometimes see the flash of a torch. At last they must have given it up as hopeless, for he can hear the boat being rowed out to sea again. He breathes more easily, and decides to search the German's pockets. He finds a pistol, which he immediately puts in his own pocket, but there is nothing else that interests him. Now follows a long and weary period of waiting, but at last day begins to break. With the coming of daylight, the officer lifts his head and looks round. He finds his own pistol being pointed at him, while at the other end of it is a rather wet, dirty, khaki-clad figure who tells him not to try any tricks, or it will be all the worse for him. As Smith is completely lost, he decides to walk until they reach the nearest farmhouse, where he will be able to get somebody to show him the way back to the training establishment. "You have got to start walking," Smith says to the German, and now they walk for what seems to be hours, until they reach a farmhouse. Smith does not go inside, but gives a loud call which results in the appearance of the farmer. After a short conversation, all three set off together. The troops have finished work and are on their way to the mess for 10 o'clock tea. Snooks: "It's not very often you have visitors in this part of the world, but I can see 3 chaps coming along the path in our direction." Will's looking up the path. "You're right, Alf, and if I'm not greatly mistaken, one of our visitors is Private Bill Smith of London town." "You're right, I think, Willie. So Don Juan's found his way back at last, but I don't understand who the others can be. It seems to me that one of them is in uniform. He looks like a naval officer, although there is something strange about him. He doesn't look like one of our naval fellows." "If I'm not greatly mistaken, Alf, that chap is a German naval officer." "What on earth can Bill Smith be doing with a German officer?" A quarter of an hour later in the CEO's office. "So I understand, Smith, that when you were coming home from the girl's place last night, you were lucky enough to pick up this German officer?" "Yes, sir." "Well, you've done very well, Smith. You are to be praised for showing such common sense and initiative. You will hear from me again later. You may go now, Smith." Turning to the sergeant major. "Will you show the prisoner in, sergeant major? I know that when we send him in to the nearest town, the intelligence fellows will worry him with thousands of questions. They must have plenty of fun in that way, but I don't see why I shouldn't have a bit of fun with this fellow myself. Let's have him in." The door opens, and the prisoner is marched in between 2 guards. "You may go too, sergeant major, but wait outside with the 2 guards." Looking at the prisoner for the first time. "What on earth does this mean? It's Jimmy Marshall, isn't it? What are you doing in that uniform?" "Good Lord, Tommy James. Fancy running into you up here. It must be 5 or 6 years since we met last." "Quite that, Jimmy. What's the story?" "We were having some night training, and I was supposed to be the captain of a German U-boat. It was part of my job to land on the coast by night and meet one of my company commanders, who was supposed to be a German agent. Everything went off as planned until I received that blow on the back of the head that your fellow gave me. It was all pretty foolish, but as it was arranged by one of the chaps in the intelligence corps, what can you expect?" It's just before lunch, and the troops are standing about talking together. "Well, I'm sorry, Bill, that you lost your way. You remember what I said about you chaps from the south as soon as you get into the mountains." "That's all right, Alf. It's a very good thing that I did lose my way, otherwise I'd never have picked up this German officer." The CEO seemed to be very pleased about it. He said I'd be hearing from him again. "You're a lucky chap, Bill. Down in the north of England you had all the luck with the girls. Now we come to a god-forsaken place like this, and out you go, and bring in a German officer." "Born lucky, that's what you are, Bill. I don't know how you chaps from the south nearly always manage to find any bit of luck that's going." There comes the CEO with the German officer. I wonder where the guards are. They seem to be talking together as if they were old friends. Can't quite make it out myself. I always thought that the CEO hated the sight of all Germans. I suppose he's going to take him to the nearest town and hand him over. Now, that's really funny. They're getting into the CEO's own car, and it looks as if the CEO is going to drive himself. What's come over the CEO? The CEO returns later in the afternoon, and Smith waits patiently. The day passes, and he receives no word from him. His friends assure him that it must be a good sign. It must mean that the German officer was a very important prisoner. Of course, if he is important, it will take some time to get a story out of him. At length, on the following afternoon, a message is received by Smith to report in the CEO's office at once. With hopes high, he makes his way to the office door. CEO, calling loudly in reply to a knock at the door. "If that's you, Smith, come in." Smith enters, giving a very smart salute. "I want to introduce you to a very good friend of mine, Smith. This is Major Marshall." Smith, looking at the officer seated behind the CEO, and recognizing him as his prisoner of the night before last. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't quite understand." Marshall, stepping forward and holding out his hand to Smith. "That's all right, Smith. That was a nice blow on the head you gave me. I can still feel it. Now, I suppose it's a bit of a disappointment to you, but I'd like to congratulate you. All I can say is that I wish all my men were like you. We were doing some night training. It was pretty poor. made by the intelligence people. The only successful thing about it was your capture of me. All right, Smith, you may go. Final word, I shan't forget you for your work the night before last. Smith, thank you, sir.